She thought she was just handing a bleeding stranger her last $5 umbrella to survive a Chicago downpour. But when Harper walked out of her cramped apartment the very next morning, 20 armored black SUVs blocked the entire street. She hadn't just saved a man, she had saved a king. The neon sign of Miller's All-Night Diner on North Clark Street flickered with a dying, erratic hum, casting a sickly red glow across the rain-slicked pavement. It was past 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, and Chicago was being battered by a torrential Lake Michigan storm. Inside, Harper leaned against the Formica counter, a damp rag in her hand, staring blankly at the rain lashing against the plate glass window. At 24, Harper's life was an endless loop of double shifts and mounting past due notices. She was scraping together tuition for her final year at DePaul University. But the real financial bleed came from her younger brother, Liam. Liam had a penchant for underground poker tables in the West Loop, and the men he owed didn't send polite collection letters. They sent broken fingers. The bell above the diner door chimed violently, snapping Harper out of her thoughts. The wind howled into the diner, bringing with it a man who looked like he had just walked out of a war zone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a heavy, dangerous grace, despite the clear agony etching his sharp jawline. He wore a charcoal grey, bespoke Brioni suit that was soaked through, clinging to his frame. But it wasn't just rain ruining the $1,000 wool. A dark, heavy stain was spreading rapidly across his left side, dripping rhythmically onto the checkered linoleum floor. Harper froze. Her instincts, honed by years of surviving the rougher edges of the city, screamed at her to hit the silent alarm under the register. The man didn't look at the cash register. His dark, piercing eyes scanned the empty diner, lingering on the shadows, before locking on to Harper. He didn't speak. He simply limped heavily toward the darkest booth in the back corner, sliding into the worn vinyl seat and leaning his head against the wood-paneled wall. Harper swallowed hard. She poured a mug of black coffee, her hands trembling slightly, and walked over to the booth. As she set the mug down, she noticed the watch on his wrist, a shattered Patek Philippe Nautilus, its platinum face smeared with crimson. "You need an ambulance," Harper whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the storm outside. "No cops. No hospitals," the man rasped, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. He pressed a hand against his bleeding ribs. "Just the coffee." Harper looked at the blood pooling on the seat. She should have walked away. But looking at him, she saw the same desperate, hunted look her brother Liam had worn 3 weeks ago when he stumbled into their apartment after a severe beating. Pity, foolish and dangerous, overrode her common sense. She rushed behind the counter, grabbed the industrial first aid kit from the back pantry, and returned to the booth. Wordlessly, she dropped a stack of heavy cotton napkins on the table, followed by gauze and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. "I can't stitch you up," she said, keeping her voice low. "But you're going to bleed out on my floor if you don't pack that wound." The man looked at her, truly looking at her this time. His eyes were the color of cold obsidian, calculating and entirely devoid of fear. He unbuttoned his ruined jacket, wincing as he pressed the alcohol-soaked gauze directly into the deep laceration along his ribs. He didn't make a sound, though the muscles in his jaw locked tight enough to snap bone. Suddenly, the sweeping beams of high-intensity headlights cut through the diner's front window. A matte black Lincoln Navigator had jumped the curb, idling menacingly just outside the glass. The man in the booth went completely rigid, his hand instinctively dropping to the heavy, customized Glock tucked into his waistband. "Get in the back," he ordered Harper, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Now." Instead of running, Harper grabbed his bloody napkins, his ruined suit jacket, and the first aid kit. "They're going to see you from the street. Get behind the counter. Hide behind the industrial flour sacks in the pantry." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pushed himself up, moving with agonizing speed to the back room just as the heavy diner door swung open. 2 men stepped inside. They didn't look like street thugs. They wore tactical dark clothing, their postures screaming military training. The heavy scent of wet pavement and ozone rolled in with them. "We're closed," Harper said, her voice remarkably steady as she aggressively wiped down the front counter, standing directly in front of the trail of blood she hadn't had time to mop. She threw her own apron over the largest red drop on the floor. The taller of the 2 men approached the counter. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at Harper. A man came in here. Dark hair, bleeding, wearing a suit. "A lot of people come in here," Harper lied smoothly, locking eyes with the man. "But the last customer I had was a drunk college kid an hour ago. If a bleeding guy in a suit comes in, I'm hitting the panic button. You want me to hit it now?" The man stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. He glanced at the empty booths, the quiet kitchen, and then back to Harper. "If you see him," the man said, tossing a plain white business card on the counter, "call this number. He's very dangerous." They turned and walked out, climbing back into the Lincoln before speeding off into the rain. Harper let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a year. She walked to the back pantry. The man was sitting on a sack of flour, his gun still drawn, his eyes studying her with intense scrutiny. "They're gone," Harper said, her knees suddenly weak. "But they're circling the block. You can't stay here. My manager comes in at 4:15 a.m. to prep the kitchen." The man holstered his weapon and slowly stood. "I have a safe house 3 blocks from here, but the street cameras are compromised and the rain is washing out the alleys. If they spot my face, I'm dead before I cross State Street." Harper looked at the torrential downpour outside. Then she walked over to the coat rack near the employee lockers. She pulled down her only defense against the Chicago weather. A ridiculously bright, cheap yellow umbrella she had bought at a CVS pharmacy for $5. She walked back and held it out to him. The man stared at the flimsy yellow nylon as if she had just handed him a live grenade. "It's massive," Harper explained, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It pulls down far enough to cover your head and shoulders completely. In this storm, under the streetlights, all those cameras are going to catch is a giant yellow blur. It's the best camouflage you're going to get." He slowly reached out, his large, blood-stained fingers brushing against hers as he took the handle. The contrast between this lethal, imposing man and the cheap, cheerful umbrella was almost comical. But neither of them laughed. "This is your only umbrella," he noted, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I can run fast," Harper said, trying to force a smile. "Take it. Go." He didn't say thank you. Men like him rarely did. He just looked at her, memorizing the lines of her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the worn fabric of her uniform. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Harper." "Harper," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "I am Lorenzo." He turned, opened the back alley door, snapped the bright yellow umbrella open, and vanished into the stormy Chicago night. leaving Harper alone with a mop and a puddle of blood. The morning sun over Logan Square was blinding, a sharp contrast to the violent storm of the night before. Harper woke up on her lumpy futon, every muscle in her body aching. Her cramped apartment smelled of damp wool and anxiety. She had spent the last 3 hours of her shift scrubbing the diner floor with bleach, terrified that the men in the tactical gear would return. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Liam. Her stomach plummeted. Liam only called this when he was in deep trouble. She threw on a faded DePaul hoodie and her worn Converse sneakers, grabbing her keys to head to Liam's apartment. But as she opened the heavy oak door of her walk-up building and stepped onto Fullerton Avenue, she stopped dead in her tracks. The street was entirely silent. There was no morning traffic, no honking cabs, no cyclists. Stretching from the corner of Milwaukee Avenue, all the way down the block were 20 identical, pitch-black armored vehicles. A mix of Cadillac Escalades and Mercedes Maybachs, all gleaming in the morning sun, completely barricading the street. Along the sidewalk, spaced exactly 10 feet apart, stood men in tailored dark suits. They were built like linebackers, hands resting calmly over their suit jackets, their eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways behind dark sunglasses. Neighbors were peeking through their blinds, entirely terrified by the paramilitary precision of the occupation. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. They found me, she thought. The men from the diner. They knew I lied. She took a step backward, intending to bolt back into her building and lock the door, but a man stepped out from the lead Maybach. It wasn't the hitman from the diner. It was Lorenzo. He looked nothing like the broken, bleeding man who had slouched in her booth a few hours ago. I was dressed immaculately in a midnight blue Tom Ford suit, a crisp white shirt, and a new, pristine Rolex Daytona catching the sunlight on his wrist. He radiated absolute power, authority, and an intimidating, quiet dominance. In his right hand, completely incongruous with his billion-dollar aura, he casually held the cheap, bright yellow CVS umbrella. As Lorenzo walked toward her, the men on the sidewalk subtly shifted, creating an impenetrable wall of bodies between him and the street. Harper stood frozen on the concrete steps. You're alive," she managed to say, her voice cracking. "Thanks to a very strategic piece of yellow nylon," Lorenzo said, his lips twitching into the ghost of a smile. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. In the daylight, she could see the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. "I told you I wouldn't forget, Harper." "You didn't have to come back," Harper said, glancing nervously at the small army surrounding her building. "And you definitely didn't need to bring a motorcade to return a $5 umbrella." "I didn't come to return it. I'm keeping it," Lorenzo said smoothly. "I came to pay a debt." He gestured slightly with his left hand. A sharply dressed man with silver hair at his temples stepped forward, handing Lorenzo a thick manila envelope. Lorenzo held it out to her. Harper crossed her arms, refusing to take it. "I don't want your money. I helped you because you were dying on my floor, not because I wanted a payout. Just take your cars and leave before the cops show up." Lorenzo let out a low, dark chuckle. "The Chicago PD will not come to this street today, Harper. I assure you of that. And this isn't cash." He stepped up onto the first stair, closing the distance between them. The scent of bergamot and expensive leather washed over her. "Open it." Reluctantly, Harper took the envelope. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of legal documents. She looked at the first page. It was the deed to her apartment building. Not her unit. The entire 12-story brick building. Paid in full. Underneath it was a cashier's check made out to DePaul University, covering 4 years of maximum tuition. "This is insane," Harper gasped, dropping the papers back into the envelope as if they burned her. "I can't take this. Who are you?" "My name is Lorenzo Romano," he said softly. The name hit Harper like a physical blow. The Romano Syndicate. They weren't just a mafia family. They were an institution. They controlled the shipping ports, the unions, the real estate development across the Gold Coast. They were ghosts, untouchable and ruthlessly violent. "You're the head of the Romanos," Harper whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I am," Lorenzo confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Which brings me to the third document in that envelope." Harper slowly reached into the envelope again and pulled out a smaller, blood-stained piece of paper. It was a ledger page. At the top, written in hasty red ink, was Liam's name, followed by a debt of $85,000. "Your brother," Lorenzo's voice hardened, the warmth completely vanishing, "has a terrible gambling habit. He owes this money to the Rossetti family. The men who came into your diner last night looking to put a bullet in my head, they were Rossetti hitters." Harper's blood ran cold. The missing puzzle pieces snapped into a terrifying picture. "When you hid me," Lorenzo continued, stepping up another stair until he was looking down at her, his presence utterly overwhelming. "You didn't just lie to street thugs. You lied to my family's greatest rivals. And unfortunately for you, Harper..." Lorenzo pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen, holding it up for her to see. It was a grainy, black and white security photo from an ATM across the street from the diner. It showed the Rossetti hitmen getting into their Lincoln. But in the background, walking away in the rain, was a distinct, massive yellow umbrella. "The Rossettis are currently tearing the city apart, looking for the woman with the yellow umbrella who helped me escape," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a deadly, possessive murmur. "They know you interfered. Wins your brother's debt is no longer just money. They want blood." Harper felt the street spin around her. Her breathing hitched, panic clawing at her throat. "Liam. They're going to kill Liam. They're going to kill me." Lorenzo reached out, his large, warm hand gently gripping her chin, forcing her to look up into his dark, unyielding eyes. "No one is going to touch you," Lorenzo said, the vow ringing with absolute, terrifying certainty. "You saved my life, Harper. You belong to me now. And the Romano family protects what is theirs." He dropped his hand and turned toward the Maybach. "Get in the car. We have a war to win." The drive to the Romano estate was an absolute blur of heavily tinted glass and silent, heavily armed tactical guards. Harper sat rigidly in the back of the Maybach, the buttery leather of the seats doing absolutely nothing to comfort her racing heart. Lorenzo sat opposite her, an impenetrable fortress of calm, tapping away on an encrypted tablet. The military precision of his convoy was undeniable. Every turn, every acceleration was coordinated with the other SUVs in the fleet, moving as a single, lethal organism through the bustling streets of Chicago. They eventually passed through massive wrought iron gates in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest, entering a sprawling compound surrounded by high stone walls and a grid of infrared security cameras. The mansion was a modern fortress masquerading as a Gilded Age architectural masterpiece. It was a place designed for both extreme luxury and brutal defense. "Liam," Harper choked out as the car finally stopped under the grand portico. "Where is he? Is he safe?" "My men are retrieving him as we speak," Lorenzo replied smoothly, stepping out into the cool morning air and offering his hand to her. Harper ignored it, climbing out on her own, her cheap canvas sneakers sinking into the pristine, crushed gravel of the driveway. Inside, the house was a stunning symphony of cold imported marble and dark mahogany. Lorenzo's second-in-command, a heavily scarred man named Matteo, immediately met them in the vast foyer. Matteo carried himself with the stiff, disciplined posture of a former special operations soldier, a stark reminder of the organized militant structure of the Romano Syndicate. "The perimeter is entirely locked down, boss," Matteo reported, his cold eyes darting suspiciously toward Harper. "But we have a major complication at the West Loop apartment. It concerns the brother." Harper's blood instantly turned to ice. "What happened to Liam? Tell me." Lorenzo's sharp jaw tightened. "Show her." Matteo led them past the grand staircase and down into a subterranean level that looked less like a typical mansion basement and entirely like a high-tech military war room. Dozens of glowing monitors lined the concrete walls, displaying live surveillance feeds from across the city of Chicago. In the very center of the stark room, bound tightly to a heavy steel chair, was Liam. His face was badly bruised, his clothes torn, but he was breathing. "Liam!" Harper sprinted forward, desperate to reach him, but Matteo stepped immediately into her path, his large hand resting threateningly on his tactical holster. "Don't," Lorenzo commanded softly, the single word freezing everyone in the room. He walked slowly past Harper, standing tall over the trembling young man. "Tell your sister exactly what you told my interrogation team, Liam. Tell her how the Rossetti family knew exactly which dark alley I would be walking through last night during the storm." Liam looked up at Harper, his eyes welling with cowardly, desperate tears. "I'm so sorry, Harp. I owed Dante Rossetti way too much money from the underground tables. They were going to completely break my legs. Then they said if I tipped them off about the Romano shipping schedules, we'd be even. I work at the loading docks, Harper. I just told them when Mr. Romano was personally inspecting the southern warehouse. I swear I didn't know they were going to try to kill him." Harper stumbled backward, the profound betrayal hitting her physically harder than any blow. The terrifying reason: Lorenzo was bleeding on the floor of her diner. The entire reason her life was currently in mortal danger was her own flesh and blood. The dramatic personal twist nauseated her. "He deliberately sold my location to Dante Rossetti for $85,000, Lorenzo said, his deep voice terrifyingly neutral. "In my structured world, Harper, high treason is always paid for with blood." "He's an absolute idiot," Harper pleaded, hot tears spilling down her pale cheeks. "He's a stupid, desperate kid who got in over his head. Please, Lorenzo, you gave me the deed to my building, the college tuition. Take it all back. Just let him go. Banish him from the city. I'll do whatever you want." Lorenzo turned slowly, his dark, calculating eyes locking intensely onto hers. The fierce, possessive fire burning in his gaze made her breath catch painfully in her throat. "Whatever I want?" he echoed, the words hanging heavy in the air. Before she could form an answer, the compound's proximity alarms shrieked violently. Flashing red emergency lights, suddenly bathed the underground war room in a sinister, bloody glow. Matteo quickly tapped his tactical earpiece, his scarred face draining of color. "Boss, it's Dante." He didn't just send a standard hit squad this time. He sent the entire organization. They've already breached the outer gate. The quiet compound instantly erupted into chaotic, orchestrated violence. The heavy rhythmic echo of automatic gunfire reverberated from the upper floors of the mansion. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He smoothly drew his custom Glock, the exact same weapon he had aimed at the diner door hours ago. "Matteo, lock down the central vault. Keep them entirely out of the west wing," Lorenzo barked, his voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. He grabbed Harper by the arm, his grip firm and unyielding. "You stay right behind me." "What about Liam?" Harper screamed frantically over the terrifying din of shattering glass and splintering wood upstairs. "If he somehow survives the crossfire, I'll consider letting him live," Lorenzo snapped, aggressively dragging Harper down the corridor toward a reinforced steel panic room at the far end of the hall. But just as they reached the heavy door, the ceiling directly above them violently exploded. A thick cloud of dust and white plaster rained down as a concentrated breaching charge blew a massive hole through the floorboards of the kitchen above. 3 heavily armed Rossetti enforcers dropped down through the settling dust cloud, their tactical assault rifles instantly raised. Lorenzo moved with a terrifying, predatory speed. He pushed Harper violently behind a thick concrete support pillar and immediately opened fire. 2 of the enforcers dropped instantly, precise shots perfectly placed in their tactical vests. The 3rd enforcer furiously returned fire, the heavy bullets chewing viciously into the concrete pillar mere inches from Harper's face. Lorenzo hissed sharply in pain, his left arm dropping slightly. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, adding fresh blood to his pristine white shirt. The remaining enforcer aggressively advanced, his rifle aimed squarely at Lorenzo's exposed chest. Harper didn't have time to think. She acted on pure adrenaline, survival instinct, and a sudden, blinding rage. She frantically scanned the debris surrounding her, and her eyes locked onto a heavy metal fire extinguisher lying discarded near the baseboard. With a primal scream, she lunged out from the perceived safety of the concrete pillar, hoisted the heavy red cylinder, and swung it with all her desperate might directly into the back of the enforcer's knees. The large man buckled instantly, with a loud shout of absolute surprise. Before he could recover and turn his weapon on her, Lorenzo fired a single, decisive shot. The enforcer slumped forward, completely motionless. A heavy, suffocating silence rapidly descended on the basement corridor, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of Matteo's highly trained tactical team mopping up the remaining Rossetti soldiers on the upper floors. Lorenzo leaned heavily against the bullet-riddled wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked down at the fallen enforcer, then slowly looked up at Harper, who was shaking violently as she dropped the heavy fire extinguisher onto the dusty floor. "You just saved my life again, Harper," Lorenzo panted, a dark, incredibly brilliant smile crossing his sharp features. "I'm keeping a running tally," she whispered back, her voice trembling but defiant. Minutes later, Matteo appeared at the end of the hall, entirely covered in white drywall dust, but completely unharmed. "It's over, boss. Dante Rossetti foolishly led the aggressive charge himself. He's dead on the front lawn. The rest of his men either surrendered or ran for the gates." Lorenzo nodded slowly, absorbing the immense tactical victory. He pushed himself off the wall and walked purposefully back into the war room. He approached Liam, who was sobbing uncontrollably in the steel chair, miraculously, completely unhurt by the falling debris. Lorenzo swiftly pulled a sleek tactical hunting knife from his dark leather belt. Liam squeezed his eyes shut tightly, whimpering in absolute terror. With a swift, brutal motion, Lorenzo slashed the thick nylon ropes binding Liam's wrists. "You owe your pathetic life entirely to your sister," Lorenzo growled dangerously, grabbing Liam roughly by the throat and forcing him to look up. "You will leave Chicago tonight. If I ever see your face anywhere in my city again, I will personally finish what Dante started. Go." Liam frantically scrambled to his feet and ran up the stairs, not looking back even once. Harper watched her brother flee, a profound, conflicting sense of immense loss and absolute liberation washing over her. The heavy, suffocating burden of saving her brother was finally gone, but she was now inextricably chained to something infinitely more dangerous. Lorenzo approached her slowly, his large thumb gently wiping a stubborn streak of white plaster dust from her pale cheek. "Dante is officially dead. The Rossetti organization is completely broken. You are finally safe." "Am I?" Harper asked quietly, looking at the fresh blood on his expensive suit and the destruction surrounding them. "I'm literally standing inside a mafia war room." "You are standing firmly by my side," Lorenzo corrected her smoothly, pulling her flush against his solid chest. "You handed a dying king an umbrella, Harper. Did you honestly think I would ever let you return to pouring coffee? That flimsy yellow umbrella saved my life, but the incredibly brave woman holding it completely captured my soul." He pressed his lips to hers in a fierce, deeply claiming kiss. It tasted sharply of smoke, copper, and absolute power. Harper slowly closed her eyes, finally surrendering to the overwhelming storm. She had bravely stepped out of the heavy rain, only to walk directly into the center of the hurricane. And God help her, she didn't want to leave. Did Harper make the ultimate mistake? Or did she just become the most powerful woman in the Chicago underworld? The line between saving a life and losing your own is dangerously thin when you are dealing with the mafia. If you loved this intense, dark romance, hit that like button right now. Share this wild story with all your friends who crave a great mafia romance. Also, do not forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories every single new week.